Hey everyone, welcome back to FPL Fran. Today's video is going to be my match day 1 forwards video, and it's the cheat sheet for it as well. If you haven't watched it already, I've already created a video for the midfielders. It's a much more stacked position, a much more diverse and deep position. So it's a lengthier video, but I hope you appreciate the work being put into it. A lot of what we do here is sort of accumulation of stats, our understanding of domestic play, how that translates potentially to the international games. And of course, looking here within the Euros, it's also about classifying, how strong certain groups are, how strong certain teams are as we head into this tournament based on predictions. And a lot of this is being supported as well by the great work of 11ify. So do feel free to check out his website in the link in the description below. He has a lot of data shared already, including predicted goals for players as well. So feel free to check that out because it's very helpful, of course, specifically for this position today, which is the forwards position. We're looking at players who are, we're picking primarily to score goals for us. What I think is interesting about the forward position, unfortunately, with UEFA games, is that there are some wingers who unfortunately get classed as forwards within the game. And that sort of dents their appeal, right? Because for a winger, you'd expect it's a lot tougher for them to score because they're not necessarily playing in central positions where you'd expect more goal scoring. And at the same time, you get, of course, just reduced points for the goal scoring. Plus, you lose out on those clean sheet points from the midfield position. So that unfortunately makes a few options here in the forward position a little bit worse. So we're primarily looking at center forwards for the most part. However, the cheat sheet here is also being supported by, as I said, the team strengths. Feel free to look out at my sort of team strength fixture difficulty ranking graphic. It kind of looks at match day 1, match day 2, match day 3. I hope that will be a useful guide to you because I recognize that a lot of players have different strategies, right? Some people are going for purely match day 1 picks and then using chip strategies for match day 2 and match day 3. Or you could be using one chip as well, saving your wild card for the later part of the tournament, and that's fine as well. So do look into that, see how you kind of pick out some players here that could be very helpful for your particular strategy. Now, going into the sort of meta discussion of the forwards, I think it's different to the midfielders, right? Because the midfield position is probably where we're going to see a lot of chop and change from a lot of FPL or even regular fantasy players in this Euro fantasy tournament. When we're looking at the forwards, however, it seems like the template is already set. It's effectively Kane plus Mbappe plus another player. Now, Kane's ownership, I think right now is 50%, Mbappe at 71%, and that could obviously go up as the tournament goes on. However, it still shows that, of course, you have arguably 1 to 2 forward spots that you can play around with that can be different from the rest of the field. It also seems like that the other popular picks to sort of supplement Mbappe and Kane are Havertz and Lukaku, but we'll be talking today about options that you can go with as well that I think are still very strong, depending on if we get more information heading towards the tournament or if you have some confidence in specific teams and specific players. So let's get started with the sort of cheap position here of the 6.5 to 7 million forwards. Their budget options. Unfortunately, as I said, there are 2 players who are wingers here who are classified as forwards for whatever reason. I don't know. Yamal is someone that I expect to start for Spain, but I have to qualify that even as a Spaniard, I think that our group is relatively tough. I'm expecting Spain to qualify for the group, but there's a difference in terms of actually going for a player who you expect to qualify versus a player who you expect to do well, exceedingly well within the groups, right? To compare it to Belgium and Doku, for example, the price point right after that, Doku just has incredible fixtures for Belgium. He also is likely to play more minutes. Yamal is also a very young player, 16 years old. It's very likely that he could rest certain games as well and even play limited minutes within match day 1 where he could be an earlier substitute because the Spanish bench at least is there. As far as with Doku, I think that he's much more consistent within this Belgian team and he's more likely going to play the full 90 minutes within a game if it's necessary. For example, with Scamacca, I think he's a great interesting option, right? Not a winger, of course, but someone that we put an asterisk on because we think that within the Italian national setup, it is very likely that this could be Scamacca's tournament to sort of start as that sort of default center forward, right? It was the reign of Immobile for a long while, but it could very well change and convert to Scamacca here under, of course, a new manager in this specific tournament compared to the last. And so that's a nice thing. I think we could look out for the friendlies for Italy to kind of get an estimation of what we think Scamacca's starting chances will be. If he starts, though, I think, as I said, going back to the whole element of chip strategy, if you have, let's say, a chip strategy in place for match day 2, going Scamacca versus match day 1 Albania sounds incredible as a punt. With Mitrovic, I think it's the opposite situation because unfortunately you have a much tougher fixture here versus England, and of course the games after that are much easier for Serbia. So I think that Mitrovic is someone probably to pass on. I wouldn't be too confident about him at all, really, within the forward position, just because of the match day 1 impact. With Fulkrug, it's the complete opposite situation. Again, you have a player who, because we have the chance to find out what the lineup is for Germany before the first match day 1 transfer deadline, you will be able to find out whether Havertz starts as a center forward or whether Füllkrug starts as a center forward. And I think there is a small possibility that Füllkrug could start. That's why, of course, based on my predictions, I think Havertz starts. However, if you do find out by the day on match day 1 that Füllkrug will start, I think he's a great pick to go with. Joselu, I've put as an avoid for now. Unfortunately, I still think Morata will start ahead of Joselu, and we'll find out, of course, as the tournament progresses, whether Joselu can maybe take away that spot. I also think, of course, with Morata, you can arguably say that his minutes are no longer as guaranteed because you have a couple options within the team that can take away his minutes. Although technically with Spain, you can argue that most of the time they do struggle to score. So if anything, they're actually going to play with 2 center forwards at times, as opposed to, for example, just doing a like-for-like swap with Morata. So unfortunately with Morata, with Joselu, he's an avoid for now, but who knows? Maybe the friendlies will also give us a different understanding of what Luis de la Fuente is going with for this European Championship. As far as the 7.5 position, we have some options I think are once again very interesting. Havertz is the sort of main dominant option, but I think Dovbyk is a very serious option because of the way that the Ukrainian fixtures are laid out. I do think, of course, when you look at team strength, when you look at, for example, some of the green options here, a lot of the green options come from teams that we expect to do well in the tournament, that we expect to advance in the tournament. But as I said, going back to it, if you're being fair, being judgmental about match day 1, match day 2, and how nicer or kinder the fixtures are for Ukraine, how good Dovbyk has been within La Liga, alongside, of course, his sort of compatriot in Sikankov as well. I think it's nice that Dovbyk is actually going to be a very interesting differential option for this element of the tournament. You can also see that his underlying stats are great, although I will say Girona were incredible this season, right? He was backed by some very creative wingers too, and a very robust midfield. However, the national team stats are a little bit worse compared to, let's say, his La Liga stats. So you can't necessarily say that they translate that well. At the same time, too, you also have some slightly tougher fixtures, although, as I said, Ukraine fortunately have nice match day 1, match day 2 fixtures, so he could be the punt to go with, particularly as well if you just find out by the time the tournament starts, if Havertz is not going to start and you're maybe not so confident in Füllkrug as a pick, you could very well just go for Dovbyk. Chiesa is an interesting option. I think that he's less interesting to me because, once again, I think he does suffer from the syndrome, of course, of, unfortunately being a winger. However, Chiesa is a bit different of a profile, right? He's not exactly just a pure winger. We have seen at times seen him playing center forward. I've even seen him manage the Juventus team as well from the touchline as well. So very diverse player, very flexible, very adaptable, and someone who, of course, is a 90-minute player, which is very nice because a lot of the forwards, unfortunately, within international football always tend to be subbed off a little bit earlier, right? When you look at a player like Havertz, he could be subbed off early. Scamacca as well could very well be subbed off early. And that's the sort of punt that you have to sort of take. With Chiesa, of course, I think he's more nailed within this Italian setup, and he could be presenting as a very good differential option if you're just going for a match day 1 punt. With Højlund, with Gakpo, with Depay, not so interested in them, to be honest. I think with the latter 2 options, they've had pretty poor domestic seasons, if we're being fair. Some of the Dutch national team spots, I suppose, would be up in the air. We'll also track the friendlies as well to notice. But the big flip side here is that all these players have really good match day 1 games, right? Højlund has a good game, Gakpo has a good game, Depay has a good game. So when you're looking at just purely match day 1 strategy, I don't really mind the idea of taking a punt option on some of these players for the same logic that we talked about with, let's say, Chiesa versus Albania. In the 8 million bracket, I think it's not too interesting. I expect Giroud to start this tournament once again for France. They do have some other options now, and Giroud has mentioned that this is his last international tournament. But I think heading into this tournament here, I can't really see why Deschamps will change really the setup too much. Giroud has been very effective for this national team, and you can see, of course, the stats have been very consistent, even, with the AC Milan stats as well. So Giroud, a great option. And ultimately, I think Dembele, even though I expect him to start as well, I just think that the French national team is always the sort of Griezmann and also Mbappe show, but Giroud also can fill in a lot and score a lot of goals as well, as we have seen in many of the qualification campaigns and also the group stages in previous tournaments. Now, previously, of course, the World Cup was, as I said, the Kane and the Mbappe and Griezmann show, and that makes for me Griezmann and Mbappe the much more interesting options. But I don't think we should discredit France, right? They're one of the strongest teams heading towards this tournament, alongside England, probably the 2 betting favorites, and that's it for a reason. As far as the 8.5 million position, you're looking at options who are either Leao, who is once again actually a winger, so in my opinion, a little bit of a sort of, detriment. But of course, he at times can sort of play a center forward type role, right? When you look at, for example, the structure of the team, it's less likely that you'll see Bernardo Silva in more advanced positions compared to, let's say, someone like Leao, if you're kind of looking at the balance of the wings. So I do like Leao, of course, and his national team stats have been actually really good, and he's been really effective. But of course, there's a detriment too, that the Portuguese bench is very strong. His minutes might not be as good as, for example, some of the more expensive options that we will be looking at right now too. And with Morata, I think I'd make the same case, even though, of course, he's just the center forward for Spain. Maybe in the friendlies, he could be deposed by Joselu. Very unlikely for me to see that happen. The fixtures are also just pretty tough for Spain. So overall, even though Morata's goal scoring odds are decent, am I that high on him as an option? No. Lukaku, Griezmann, I think are just incredible at 9 million. I think these are both options that you can definitely go with. Griezmann is an interesting one because, of course, the goal scoring odds, compared to some of the other players here, and even when you look at the national team stats, the sort of goal and assist per 90 is much more inferior, right? Players like Havertz, players like Dovbyk have better stats, Højlund as well. But I think the big thing that Griezmann does benefit from is, of course, expected assists, things like that. And also, even within his own play style, you can argue more ball recoveries than most of the traditional forwards within the game. So that's nice. And then also the man of the match element of the game. Because I think when you watch Griezmann play, when you watch the French national team play, yes, of course, Mbappe is probably their most key player, but arguably you could even go back to just the recent World Cup and mention that Griezmann was incredible within all those games and got man of the match in some of them too. So for me, he's a very crucial player for France. Had a great season as well with Atletico Madrid, despite them as a team having a poor season. He's just had a brilliant individual season. So for me, heading towards this tournament, I think he's still a key essential player. And with a great fixture like Austrian match day 1, I would be pretty tempted actually in going for Griezmann if you were pretty high on the idea that he could, for example, get some of those intangibles like man of the match. Lewandowski, I think, is just not so interesting. Poland, of course, is a much worse team, unfortunately, and the group is very tough, right? With Netherlands, match day 1 rather, and then France match day 3. You're really looking at Lewandowski probably only as an interesting option for match day 2, but whether you even want to spend that much money for him is interesting, and it only depends, I suppose, whether you're prepared to use the limitless chip for then. Moving on to the full premium positions to keep it short and simple. These are all amazing picks. Ronaldo, of course, is at a different point in his career, right? And so justifiably is, cheaper than, let's say, a Kane and Mbappe. I do think Mbappe, if I was to be honest, and to balance the options between him and Kane, I do think he is clear of Kane, because when you look at, for example, the odds, when you look at, for example, the assist numbers, the man of the match numbers, the potential there, I think it's all much higher with Mbappe, to be quite honest, even though I'd say that they're arguably in a slightly maybe similar group to England, and you can actually see that England actually have better predicted numbers on team goals, on team clean sheets as well. I just think that Mbappe, when you look at, for example, the predicted numbers, when you look at 11FI site, are so clear. For me, he's an option that I think I find will be very hard to go without. With Ronaldo, it's an interesting one where I think you can't really create a team that easily with a trident of Ronaldo, Mbappe, and Kane. So the question with Ronaldo is always going to be whether you go for someone like Bruno Fernandes as well if you want to get that Portuguese attack in your team, or whether you simply drop Kane, right? Because simply dropping Kane allows you 1 million to maybe bolster other areas within your team, and then going for Ronaldo too can be an interesting punt because the fixtures are very good for Portugal within the group, and he's a very fit player. I don't think we've moved to a stage in his career where you're going to see him, for example, not start all 3 fixtures within the group stage. So that's a nice thing with Ronaldo too, even despite the sort of place he's at within his career. The national team numbers have still been very consistent, and I do think that, yeah, it is justifiable to potentially drop Kane. The only thing that's tough about that, though, is I think a lot of people will still like to go for Kane because he presents himself as a great captaincy option in match day 1. And then Ronaldo can be sort of replaced by the Bruno Fernandes option within the midfield position, which is a little bit cheaper. You could make the same argument, to be fair, with Foden and Saka, even Bellingham, the likes of those players, for Kane as well. But it really comes down to what sort of balance you want to go for. I do think Kane is ultimately a pure talisman, and I still think that England are a better team than Portugal, despite the group for Portugal being easier. And that's pretty much what it comes down to. If it comes down to ownership as well, though, I do not mind the idea of going for Ronaldo and then maybe doubling up on the English midfield instead. Because going for, let's say, Kane and Saka seems to be a pretty preferential pair for a lot of people, and then maybe having one English defender. Although you could actually just you could also switch that up, go for Foden and Saka, and then maybe an English defender, or maybe double up on English defense. And that could be another way that you choose to spend your money and your budget within Euro 2024 fantasy for match day 1. But that's it for the video. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you guys have a wonderful time with the tournament, and I'll see you guys soon with more content. Goodbye.